My dear friends, it's great to see you. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. And on this channel, I perform dramatic readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. In this episode, we're going to continue our dramatic reading of The Story of an Interesting Person, Call Me Tennessee by Jeff Klitzner. And so as we're getting closer to the end of this work, we've had a lot of ups and downs and some stuff that is frankly unbelievable, but I've got enough evidence of to where it's plausible. And you may remember in the last episode, Jeff had a breakdown and decided to run off to New Zealand. And now we get that story. Buckle up, because highway safety is going to be important in this one. Chapter 33, New Zealand. Sitting in the bar in Denver, I recalled the fact that I've been here before. Not anything big, it just reminded me of the places I've been. Like that time in Atlanta, where I damn near missed my flight because I was drinking on Central Time, and the time in Denver I missed a flight because I wanted a cigarette. Some people might have a problem with this, but I didn't. Things come up sometimes, and you're happier where you are than where you're going. Now, I don't pretend that I went to New Zealand for any other purpose than to drink myself into a bottle and crawl out into something, anything better, if not just stay tucked into that bottle like a turtle. On my way off in LA, wandering around, I came across a few guys who I'd met in Denver. We joked about the fact we had different flights all the way to Auckland, and then we sparked up a nice joint before the flight. Getting past security stoned worked well for me. Wearing my Baja and shades, the TSA agent asked where I bought it. I told him somewhere in between Memphis and Lake Charles. He laughed and said he hadn't seen anybody wearing one of those in years. I grinned and told him to dust his off. I was going to bring it back into style one way or the other. He asked what the other was, and my glossy eyes gave it all away as I raised my arms and gave him a purple nurple, or nipple twister. He cracked up trying to hold back the other agents that came running up. I felt merciful, so I dropped my grip, and he asked if I was holding. I said, "Not anymore, Holmes." He waved me through the rest of the line. I got to the gate, and it was packed. I walked to the bar, grabbed a drink, and started chatting up some couple on their honeymoon. After the line thinned out, I made my way to the gate and got stuck in the middle of these two fat ladies. After the flight took off, one of the ladies complained about my lack of respect for her size, and then I was given a seat in the rear of the plane. Talking to the flight attendants, I was drinking it up as if we would crash at any moment. It was a very turbulent flight, and I was paranoid due to the weed I had just smoked. I eventually calmed down, and some kid asked me about how to score when we get over there. I told him, "Anywhere you go, just look for two things. Long hair and a pizza parlor, and you'll find a way to get stoned." I was well aware of these cardinal rules to buying weed in foreign countries, and so felt it my duty to share with the youngster who was taking his first trip out of the States. After getting off the plane, customs was weird. They took some of my beef jerky and checked my tent, and were very concerned with my lack of plans. However, they let me go. I grabbed a flyer that advertised cars for under $6 a day. I called up and got one for 3 months, and then I stopped at a grocery store, bought shoes, a phone, and a trunk full of boxed wine, baked beans, and tuna. You can live off it. That's all I cared about. I grabbed an atlas and a full tank of gas and headed up north to the northernmost point on the island nation. Driving all night and sipping from the box, I finally made a pit stop and decided to camp there for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was woken up by the sounds of sheep and a cocked shotgun. I got out. The guy said, "This is private property." I said, "My bad, dude. I'll pack up." He said it was cool and asked if I had any good drugs. I told him I just got in, but then he recommended I take a hit off his already lit spliff. We had a good talk, and before he left, I gave him a shot of Jack Daniels. He asked why it was that I had several bottles on me. I gave him the answer, and he said, "That's just fucked up, man. Here, take this bud with you. Stay here as long as you want." The next night, when I woke after a very restful slumber, I continued up north. To make it there by sunrise was going to take some time on those gravel roads. Finally, I came to a fork in the road, and the sign had been somewhat twisted. I was looking for a while, trying to make up my mind, knowing I was only a few miles away, but not sure left or right. Well, since death would most likely strike from the left, I went to face him head on. I drove for another 10 minutes and it appeared that I was in a parking lot, but I couldn't see anything. I stopped to look at the map, but no dice. I tried to back up and heard the wheel spinning, no traction. I thought to myself, mud or sand. Either way, I'm hosed. I got out and started looking for a nice tree branch to gain some traction when I came across a sign that had been knocked down. It said, "Be alert, high and low tide from X to X. Do not drive unless in four-wheel drive vehicle." I was in a mid-'80s Toyota Corolla. I knew damn well I would be stuck for a while. I did what I thought was right given the time of night and the fact the radio station had a nice mix of Skynyrd and AC/DC. I popped the trunk, grabbed a box of wine, rolled up a joint, and then I laid back listening to some solid tunes, watching the stars. I realized I had nothing to fear, for in a place of such beauty, God had to be with me. I just waited for him to send me some help and rocked out. After the sun had risen, I saw some Korean tourists and I asked them for a ride or a phone to call a tow truck. They looked confused, so what the hell? I asked them in their native tongue if they cared to dance. When they said no, I told them to sit down and shut up. Class was about to begin. I was close to using all my Korean speech, so I finished it up by asking them if they cared for a drink. They said no, and then I told them to enjoy their trip. I didn't speak any English to them, and while I knew about what level of English they were at just by looking at them, I figured it wasn't worth my trouble to ask them for help. They left, and a guy came up in a makeshift camper and said, "Oh hell, I can get you out." He gave me one end of the rope, I attached it to the frame, and he began to pull. As he was pulling, he started to sink. I offered him a shot, he offered me a toke, and we sat there waiting patiently. Eventually, someone from Park Services came down and pulled us both out, and then he showed me how to get to where I wanted to go. I pulled up, and it was worth the trouble. Blue skies, blue seas, and snow-covered mountain peaks, as far as the eye could see. I camped out in the car, since the sign said no camping, and waited for the sun to come up the next day. I met some others with the same idea. I sold them a box of wine for some traveling cash, and we waited for the sun to come up together. Sure enough, the next day, the sun did come up again. I wasn't sure at that point whether it would or not. Turns out, all the trouble was worth the sight before my eyes, and words would not begin to do it justice. So therefore, I recommend you put down the books about other people's lives and start living your own. Now I hit the road again, and low on gas. I decided to grab some gas, not enough money for a full tank, but what the hell. I let the kid fill up my tank while I went to the bathroom. Then I hopped in the car and took off. I passed by a cop with my heart pounding, with the idea of a high-speed chase running through my head. I knew their police don't carry guns, so I had that going for me, but I was lucky. He didn't follow me. As night began to fall across the land, I opted to camp on the beach, despite the warnings, because, well, my name was Tennessee. And what's the worst thing that could happen? Nothing. The morning sun woke me, and the wine in my body told me I should probably drink some more. So I did, and then decided to hit the road again. See, I forgot which side of the road to drive on, but I was reminded by a line of cars as I made a turn, and eventually I had to choose between hitting a truck head on or wrapping myself around the big old tree in front of me. I opted for the truck and bounced off his headlights like a champ. I successfully kept on the road and passed the guy, who was yelling and screaming. I was alive and unharmed, so I just got on the right side of the road and kept on trucking as Highway to Hell had just started playing on the radio. I was headbanging down the road for a while until I passed a proper tavern with a motel attached. I went in, asked about finding a place to camp for the night, and grabbed a beer. It was good, I must say. I was talking to some guy who offered the rugby field for my sleep purposes when the owner shouts out, "Where are you from?" I told the truth. "Memphis, Tennessee. Home of the king and birthplace of the blues, with my head held high." I noted that I was Californian by birth and Southern by the grace of God. The owner yelled back, "Give him a beer and tell him to come sit down," even though I could hear him perfectly well. I got another beer and went over to him. As I got there, we shook hands like men sizing each other up. He asked what happened to the car because it looked like hell, all covered in sand, missing half the front end and dragging a bumper from a pickup truck. We started talking, and out of the clear blue he says, "You know, I reckon Ronnie Van Zant was the greatest man to ever live. Speechless. I began nodding my head as he began reading off the list of reasons why. Now, I've heard some rather large statements in my day, but that one took the cake. To say the barefooted lead singer of the greatest rock and roll band ever to grace God's green earth, Leonard Skinner, was the greatest man to ever live won the contest. I wanted to argue, but thought to myself, I suppose you could say that. I wouldn't, but who am I to rain on this parade? I agreed, and then he offered me a bed in the back of the house, free of charge, and told me I was welcome to stay as long as I wanted. If need be, he would put me to work. At this point, I went outside to actually inspect the vehicle for the first time. He followed and laughed with me, and then he said, "Don't worry, this will cheer you up," and started rolling a joint. I recall thinking to myself, if this ain't heaven, I'm not sure I want to go, because this place felt like home. For me, that was a big statement. I'd been wondering for years, always looking around every town I visited, wondering, what if I lived here? They call it Cain's curse, destined to wander the earth, never finding a permanent home. It is said to affect those who killed somebody in a previous lifetime. I found what I had been searching for, and it was perfect. I knew I was home that night when I passed out on the cot set up just above the empty kegs. Chapter 34, The Law. Awoken the next morning by the sound of a barking dog and flashing lights reflecting off the two-way mirror in the back room, I saw a cop talking to the owner, listening in the best I could. The cop was saying the driver of that car had hit another car and taken it onto the 90-mile beach, all of which violated the rental agreement. The car needed to be returned to the rental car company. The owner told the cop that he saw some black guy drop off the car last night and hop in another car. The cop then mentioned that he was headed north to look for this other car, and if the owner saw the driver again, to call him and try to stall him for a while. The owner agreed and then walked back with a look of satisfaction on his face. He gave me a map and he said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to do it, but there is a pond about 2 days away. There is a town another 5 miles past the pond. Just follow the ocean. You're welcome back here anytime. I'll call the cop in about 4 hours and tell him to go west while you're off to the east. Get some distance, get out of sight. Here's some cash in case you need it. Best of luck to you." Now I knew I had found a home. He also gave me a small quantity of the stuff we were smoking the night before, which is as good as good luck. With that, I called the radio station and requested the DJ play the theme song to the Dukes of Hazzard and told him to dedicate it to my 5-year-old son who was dying of testicular cancer. Not to make light of testicular cancer, but I wanted to make sure the song would be played. Off I sped, straightening the curves and flattening the hills as fast as I could go. I dodged the main roads, and I was on gravel for a while. I pulled up to a secluded beach that night to sleep and awoke the next day. I continued my journey to the Lily Pad Pond, as it was called. Out of nowhere, this damn ewe and about 5 lambs came running across the road. I tried to swerve, but on the bright side, I only hit one. I felt bad, got out of the car, poured him a shot, and one for myself, of course. Then I hopped back in and floored it. I was running low on gas again, but really didn't want to pull up anywhere. Unfortunately, I had to. I got on a main road, pulled into the station, gave the kid $5, and got just enough gas to get me to where I was headed. Night began to fall, and I was close but couldn't find the pond. They don't believe in streetlights in New Zealand. I parked at another beach, and in the morning started driving again. A cop pulled up behind me, and I was like, oh well. He asked me about the car. I told him I had hit a rock on the beach and was driving it back to the car company, but couldn't drive at night. My heart was racing. He saw the wine on the seat and asked me if I was drunk. I told him that was left over from last night. He bought it, and I drove off. I found a beach town and asked the locals for this place on my hand-drawn map. I figured it out and started off to it. About a half mile from the road where it was located, that same cop pulled up behind me. He said, "You stole some gas at this gas station." I told him, "Nope." He said, "Okay, well, your car has been reported stolen by the car company, so at this point I'm going to write you a ticket to appear before the local judge on Wednesday." Then he said, "Are you drunk?" "I think you are. Blow in this." I blew. Fortunately, I was just under the limit, as it goes up by your age over there. I was okay, but then the cop saw blood and wool and asked, "Did you hit a sheep?" I was like, "That's old." He said, "Don't talk at this point. I'm placing you under arrest. I'm going to read you your rights. After taking my statement, which consisted of saying the sheep came out of nowhere, it was an accident, I was locked up. Well, every 2 hours they let you go outside for a cigarette, and Saturday night they allow you 2 beers with your meal. On Sunday morning, I was told that since they couldn't find the owner of the sheep, the charges would be dropped until they could find the owner. Then I would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I realized it was too late to dump the car as I was walking back to it. I had already been charged with grand theft auto, but released back to the car until Wednesday when I had to appear before the judge. I went about my business, telling folk on the beach my troubles over boxed wine. They would normally just give me grass, saying it would help cheer me up. I figured if I kept this up, I might have enough to start selling and just buy another car. All was going good until I met an Israeli who wouldn't leave me alone until I agreed to go back to his hostel. He said I could stay for free. Turns out he was one of those Messianic Jews for Jesus pushers. Now, I might not be the most practical of Jews in my method of worship, and I'm not going to tell a Christian he's worshiping an idol with that cross, but a Jew for Jesus is just asking for trouble. I did what I could to not argue scriptures with him, but he kept up until I laid down the biblical law by telling him to pick a religion. I don't care which one, and I don't think God would either, but he needed to pick one or the other. He was visibly shaken by my rant and confused enough that I gave him Siddur, a Jewish book of prayer, and told him to read the Hebrew as if the words were his own and to try to feel God's love. The next morning, I saw him do that and start crying. I'm glad I could help him out, poor guy. I hated to leave him like that, but I had to be in court in a few days. I went about and drove to the courthouse a few days early. They had warm water, a luxury I hadn't used in a while. I opted to just wait in and around the car for Judgment Day. All was going well until the battery died. No matter, I still had plenty of wine, beans, and tuna. I waited patiently that cold, rainy Wednesday morning for my name to be called. Sure enough, it was. They told me I needed a lawyer, so I went outside and got one. He explained the car thing might work itself out, but the sheep was going to get at least 2 years if they found the owner. I went back before the judge, and the prosecutor made a good argument to put me in jail while waiting for the owner of the sheep to come forward. However, my lawyer made the better argument, suggesting that the sheep might not even have been a sheep. It could have been anything. The judge agreed and let me go on my own recognizance, provided I handed over my passport and not to flee before my next court date. It had been rough and cold. I hadn't eaten a warm meal in some time, but I'd be damned if I was going to prison over this. I went back to my car with a dead battery and a smell of wine and tuna that could only compare to the open-air fish markets in Seoul. Another day went by, me still drinking and smoking in front of the courthouse, and a cop pulls up. It's the chief of police. I told him my long, sad tale, starting with taking care of my grandfather and admitting the plan to drop the car in a pond. He told me he would call the rental car company and find out what to do about getting me back home. He then told me to hang tight and not trust any of the blacks in town. They might try to steal my wine. I laughed, and he said he was serious. I told him they would have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. That night, as I was passed out rather comfortably in the back seat, I got a knock on the window. It was a female officer. She asked me to pack up my stuff and put it in her car. We were going to the chief's house. As we pulled up, I saw him carrying a cooler to his squad car, and he said to toss my gear in the back seat. Off we went, as he was taking me to the American consulate. He had already called ahead, so they were expecting my arrival in Auckland later that day. I wasn't sure what was going on, except I would be getting a passport and flight to LA that night. I thought to myself, it could be worse, and we had a good conversation about crime and how it doesn't pay in this town. I kept thinking if I had 2 more Tennesseans, I could take over half the country in a month and people would fall in line like the sheep. The best part is, I wouldn't need a gun. After a good hour of silence, the chief asked me if I had any clue whose sheep it was that I had hit. I told him I had no clue what it was, but where I come from, it would have been legal for me to pick it up and eat it. He started laughing and mentioned he had done that once before, and then we swapped jokes for a while. He opened the cooler filled with beer and said to have at it. We drank for a while, then grabbed some lunch. We got to the consulate, and he wished me good luck. With that, I got my gear and went inside. The sweet lady inside gave me a bunch of paperwork and told me to get a photo taken. I came back, she gave me some money, and called me a cab to the airport. I was headed back to LA with a little under $30 and a massive hangover coming. Chapter 35, Home Sweet Home. So arriving at LAX, I wasn't really sure where to go next. I did what anybody would do. I got one of those shuttles to the beach, and when the driver stopped and demanded payment, I gave him an expired debit card that I had picked up over the years. When he went to run it, I disappeared. Blending in with the strange beach folk in Venice, I just went south. I eventually caught a ride to San Diego. I still had the boxes of wine just in the bags that were inside the box. My load was getting lighter by the day, and hell, the weather was great. I wasn't really sure what to do or where to go. Being homeless has a freedom to it, but it also messes with your head when people ask, where are you going? If you say, nowhere special, it just doesn't get you anything. You tell people a city on the other side of the country, well, that changes everything. After a couple of days in Tijuana, I rode to a rest stop in Amarillo, where I found a trucker headed to Memphis. I hopped aboard and got back to the home of the king. That really was just the beginning. I was hanging out over at my friend's house again, but wasn't sure what to do next. I held on to my dice for a day or two before I rolled them, and then I went to tell my grandfather I'm sorry, and I would pay him back eventually. He gave me some cash to get around and went back to lunch boxes. On day 2, I had a sharp pain in my stomach and couldn't hold anything down. Once again, my intestines had decided to do some yoga, so I was back in the hospital, the tube up my nose, waiting for the pain to go away. They did the surgery the next morning, and I was stuck in the hospital for another 2 or 3 weeks. Not much happened. I got released and stopped by my grandfather's afterwards to grab some clothes. He suggested I stay there. It was happening all over again, but I had nothing else to do at the moment. I started talking to some old friends off and on. When I healed up, I started taking care of my grandfather again, taking him to the doctors and Costco. It was getting close to Christmas, and he was doing okay. We wouldn't let him drive, which made life weird, but okay. I was just doing my thing, started praying again, learning with the rabbi nearby on random days. As Christmas came, the girl from Florida was coming up. She called me a couple of times, and eventually we went out once. She made a joke about me working for her dad, and I figured, sure, why not? I met with him around New Year's Eve and made some jokes while sipping from a flask. It went well. All I needed was a small job to get me out of the house a couple hours a day. If I could pull in close to $100 a week, it would be fine. Well, it took a month or so before I went to work for him. He asked me to do some manual labor for a month. It paid hourly. Around the same time, my grandfather needed to get a pacemaker. Shortly after that, he was upset about the fact I was working and would leave him alone with nowhere to go. One thing led to another, and his pacemaker acted funny one weekend, so we went to the hospital. It was an overnight stay and turned out to be nothing big, just a funny feeling when it went off. About a week later, a social worker came over to see how he was getting along. She asked me to let her know if he needed to go to assisted living. Now, I understood this would probably leave me homeless, and I shouldn't make that decision. But at the same time, it made sense. He would have a nurse on call, people to talk to, people to help him get dressed, and someone to take him wherever he wanted to go. I didn't want to send him to an assisted living home, but I also didn't want to be sponging off him. I also had to go to the hospital for a day as my stomach was messing with me. After spending most of the day there, I realized it was just stress. I wasn't sure what to do, and it's not like you can just ask around, hey, what do I do with my life now? Sometimes in life, we have to make decisions that will put us in a position that we don't want to be in. But the decision got made, and she recommended that he could go to an assisted living home, and then she told him his VA benefits may help him with the cost. I was tangled in a web of stress and decided that maybe the bottle would help with all of this. I had a friend come visit from Australia, and we went out and about. All was okay until I finished training at the job and was about to move into my friend's mom's apartment with no electricity and under renovations that weren't going to be restarted anytime soon. It was a Friday night, and come Monday, I had to get out of that apartment. The more I was sitting around the apartment, the more stressed I was getting, knowing I was about to be in a world of hurt. My last paycheck was like $47, so I knew that job wouldn't be enough for me to turn the lights on or even pay for gas and food. I wasn't sure what to do, and the more I sat around, the more upset I got. So I went out for a drink, and, well, to spare people the details, I drank for a while longer, switched places, and even swung by a friend's house that night. I was 3 sheets to the wind, but I didn't hit a tree, a car, a sheep. Hell, I didn't even break a traffic law, except for the fact I was drunk and somebody reported me in. I didn't care all that much. I called my friend and he tried to bail me out, but the bond didn't get set until Sunday. My date with the judge would probably be Monday. Now, I really don't care. I was debating staying in jail. Despite the cramped cell and bad tasting food, I found peace there. I realized I screwed up and I'll pay the consequences. Maybe this way, by the time I was 30, I would still be alive. I wasn't sure I was actually going to get out. A friend of mine showed up as my lawyer, which was cool. I told her I just wanted to get out of there, which I suppose I did. Now, it wasn't until I got out and found out all the money would cost to keep from going back to jail while on probation that I realized I would have been better off in jail. Instead, I went back to the condo of shadows and took the easy way out by calling my family in California to borrow the money just for the courts. I had to borrow money from a lot of people to keep out of jail for that year. I do regret my actions needed for survival. I went to a couple of AA meetings, but I got to tell you, I couldn't take the people telling their stories. It was only getting me fired up, and AA made me want to go out for beer. I wasn't going anywhere fast, and as much as I wanted help from my friends, I couldn't ask them. Hell, I really didn't want to ask anybody. I just wanted to go to jail, do my time, and move on. Somehow, one of my friends came by and picked me up one day to spend some quality time in the AC, and I just kind of stayed there for the weekend, and that turned into a few months. Right around this time, after months had passed, I went looking for a job, knowing I was in a world of hurt. I couldn't land any of them because I didn't have a car until I got an interview with a Starbucks on the other side of town. I was also making my way back into the Jewish community as it was the holy season. I suppose it made sense in my head, even if the people whose couch I was on didn't get it. All they knew was, if given the chance to bum off people, I would. But I also had some mad housekeeping skills. I made my way to temple one holiday and was talking with this guy most of the day between prayer and food. Somehow, we managed to lock ourselves outside while smoking behind the kitchen area and surrounded by a high fence. We were stuck. I tried to climb the fence and was impressed with the fact I got up there. However, getting down wasn't going to be easy, but I landed. I also couldn't feel my foot after I did, and when I tried to walk, it didn't work. I managed to cut my hand also, which puzzles me to this day. Well, look, sometimes life gets funny, and when you're not sure what to do, you climb a fence. If you fall and break your ankle, so be it. I managed to get in and out of the hospital with this thing that was drilled into my shin and underneath my foot to make sure the bone would line up when it healed. Oh yeah, I checked my messages. I'd gotten the job at Starbucks, and I would start work on Monday. Talk about irony. This just seems to be the way life goes. After falling all around my friend's house for a couple of weeks, getting back on my feet wasn't happening anytime soon. They were really tight on money, and I was always on their couch, pretty much helpless. So they asked me to leave. I understood. I wasn't upset, it just sucked. I really don't know why we eventually stopped talking, me and those friends I stayed with. I get it, and I don't. Those last few months I'd been under a lot of stress, with people I knew getting shot or killing themselves, others arrested, getting phone calls and emails from people all over the world as the law was starting to come down on them. Most of them found their way out, others were put out. I was just destined to be miserable for the rest of my days, give or take a year. Back to being homeless, this time with a broken ankle and one hell of a story. That sounded better than, I jumped a 12-foot fence to get to the other side. Take it or leave it, that's my story. A couple of centuries ago, I would have been a jester or a traveling sage. And that's where we'll leave it for today. And we're going to have one more episode left where we come to the conclusion of the autobiography. And I think some of the best stuff's in there. Now, I find the rest of the autobiography very entertaining, but there's some gold and some prophecy going on in the final chapters. So, want to go to New Zealand? Turns out drinking and driving and just floating around in miasma of pills and alcohol, probably not the best idea. So, it is what it is, but it makes for an entertaining story to hear. Probably not as fun to live with. But man, apparently everybody he met in New Zealand smoked weed and gave him weed. So I wonder if that's still true. Let me know in the comments below. I am curious because all I hear is bad stuff coming out of New Zealand, which is a shame because it's such a beautiful place. Let me know your thoughts, reactions to this story in the comments below. I read them all and I appreciate them all. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to like and subscribe, share this around to other friends who might need help beating the rap of hitting a sheep. That's what I got for now, my dear friends. Till next time, I wish you nothing but the best.